Snow swirled around Silver Spur Ranch, but inside the cookhouse, a shy woman's cornbread warmed more than hands. Edith was no one's sweetheart, just a cook with quiet courage. When whispers rose, and a well-dressed rival mocked her in front of the crew, she didn't flinch. Then a sick child appeared in the snow. Edith stepped forward. Hank, the foreman, stood beside her. But when sickness spread and blame followed, would kindness hold the line, or would pride crack it? Stick around, partner. This tale's got heat, heart, and the kind of stand that changes everything. The snow hadn't let up in 2 days. Wind flung it sideways like fists, caking the bunkhouse windows and piling against the barn doors. Inside, 20 tired men sat hunched over tin bowls of stew that tasted more like water than beans. Then came cornbread, warm, thick-cut, golden brown. Hank Calder leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the room change. They'd all laughed when he hired her, called her too much, woman for ranch life, said she'd never last the first freeze. But now they were quiet, because the cornbread cracked just right when torn, because the chili cream soothed our mouths and opened frozen lungs, because Edith May, in her flour-dusted apron and quiet eyes, cooked like home felt before it got hard. "You keep the fire," Hank had told her that first morning. "I'll weather the rest." She hadn't spoken much, just nodded once and lit the stove before dawn. But not everyone liked peace. Vera Lark arrived that afternoon. On a glossy chestnut mare, wrapped in red wool and silver buttons, she dismounted like she expected applause. Her gloves were white, her voice sharper than sleet. "Well, well, you've gone and hired yourself a wife, Hank? Or is this charity season?" Hank didn't move from his post. "Edith runs the kitchen." Vera laughed. "Runs it, does she? What's next? Hosting teas?" She stepped close enough for snowflakes to sizzle on her breath. "You forget whose porch you promised. Once." "I didn't promise you anything but a polite goodbye," Hank said, even. "And I meant it." The bunkhouse door opened behind him. Edith stepped out, holding a basin of rinse water. Her hands were red from scrubbing, her chin lifted. Vera's eyes raked her. "This the help?" Thought cooks needed clean collars. One of the hands, young Jeb, shifted uncomfortably. "Food's better than we've ever had, Miss Lark." "Oh, I'm sure it is." Heavy hands make heavy plates. Edith didn't answer. She set the basin down, wiped her palms on her apron, and turned back toward the kitchen, her steps careful in the ice. Later, Hank found her behind the woodshed, kneeling by a chopped stump, shoulders shaking. "You all right?" he asked softly. She didn't look up. "I know what folks say. I hear it on the wind." "I don't hire ears," Hank said. "I hire hands that work, and hearts that stay." Edith sniffed, wiped her nose on her sleeve. "You'll regret it, they say." "I don't tend to regret keeping men fed and warm." At supper, she served baked apples dusted with cinnamon. A hush fell as forks scraped plates. Outside, the wind howled louder, like it wanted to claw through the walls. In the dark, Vera's parting words echoed. "You'll see, that cook fire won't keep you safe when the cold really sets in." But Hank washed every dish that night, and Edith's hands, though cracked, stirred broth with the steadiness of someone who'd been through worse winters. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Until a distant cry cut through the wind. A child's cry. Edith dropped her ladle. Hank froze mid-dry. The wind didn't lie. It carried fear and frost in equal measure. They looked at each other. No command passed. No plan made. Edith tied her scarf. "No child cries alone," she said. She opened the door and stepped into the storm. Hank followed, grabbing his coat and lantern. And just like that, the quiet ranch became something more than a workplace. It became a stand. Saving a child is one thing, keeping him safe from the tongues of town and the lies they carry. That's where the real storm begins. The child they found was no more than 5, wrapped in a too-thin shawl, cheeks red with windburn, eyes wide as barn cats. Edith pulled him close, bundled him in a wool coat, and whispered, "You're safe now, sugar. You hear me?" Hank carried him through the gale. The snow bit harder, but something warmer burned behind them. Dozens of ranch hands had stepped out onto the porch, lanterns raised, watching their cook and foreman vanish into the storm for a stranger's cry. By morning, the boy had a fever and no name. Edith boiled willow bark tea. Hank chopped kindling and watched from the doorway as she laid cool cloths over the child's brow. With hands that barely shook, word of the rescue rode faster than any telegram. At Dusty Creek's dry goods store, a man in a slick hat tilted his head. Wade Pritcher, cattle buyer, fancy boots, soft eyes that never smiled right. "Found a stray in the storm, huh?" he said loud enough for the clerk and two ranch wives to hear. "Sweet story. Some women'll do anything for sympathy." "Some men'll say anything to cut a deal," said Doc Merriweather, appearing from behind a shelf of vinegar bottles. Wade just tipped his hat and chuckled. That night, Hank handed out new wool gloves to the bunkhouse crew, quietly bought on his own dime. He saw the way men looked at Edith, less like they pitied her, more like they respected the line she'd stepped across for that boy. But respect doesn't always rise louder than rumor. By the end of the week, Vera's tale had grown teeth. She said the boy belonged to some girl Edith once knew, said he was left behind in the war, though which war she didn't say. At church, someone asked Edith outright, "Is he yours?" She smiled, small and tired. "No, ma'am, but I feed what's hungry." Some allies gathered quietly. Juanita, the new schoolmarm, came by with crayons and a copy of Pilgrim's Progress. She left it with the boy, who clutched it like a fence post and Flood. Boone, the old prospector, limped over with dried peaches and a slow nod. "Ain't many would light a fire for strangers," he said, "but them that do tend to live longer in folks' memories." Pritcher stopped by again, this time with a supply check excuse and eyes that lingered too long on Edith's worn apron. "Mighty domestic for a woman with no kin of her own," he said. Hank stepped between them. "We keep the cook fire hot, Mr. Pritcher. If you want cold hearts, there's colder ranches." Later that night, Edith found a small note tucked under the cookhouse door. "Kitchen charity, don't win contracts." Hank read it, lips pressed tight. "You think it's Pritcher?" she asked, folding dishcloths slowly. "Could be, or Vera, feeding him firewood." She didn't speak for a while. Then, "I can leave, Hank, if it'll save the ranch." He set the note aflame in the stove. "You leaving would break the ranch." The next morning, snow melted just enough to reveal tracks by the north fence. The boy saw them. First, small boot prints, doubled back, and a drag mark where someone had slipped. Fresh. Edith paled. Someone was watching. Hank said nothing. He just tightened the wire. A whispered insult is one thing. A quiet threat left in the snow, that calls for proof, and old papers may hold the key. The next day broke brittle and blue. Ice clung to every fence post, but Hank Calder's breath came steady as he tightened the last bolt on the water pump. Something had jammed it again, second time in a week. He knelt by the bin to fetch the wrench, but instead found a small canvas bundle wedged under the flour sacks. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside, a yellowed ledger wrapped in oilcloth, his mother's initials on the cover. She'd kept meticulous records back in her cookhouse years, ration notes, recipe margins, even notations on hand strength and recovery times. And tucked into the back, a brittle document stamped and signed by a past ranch owner. Cookhouse wages equal to top hand, with winter bonus if crew. Health holds through season. He stared at it. This wasn't charity. This wasn't kindness as favor. Edith's work wasn't extra. It was essential, legal, and protected by a standing agreement most had likely forgotten or ignored. He flipped the pages again and paused at the last. A single recipe for sage gravy scribbled in faint pencil, followed by a note. "The fire that feeds men will outlast their pride." Hank slipped the ledger under his coat and returned to the porch. He looked across the snowy yard where Edith knelt beside the cookhouse steps, coaxing kindling into flame. Behind her, the boy slept in a quilt, breathing easier now. He hadn't spoken a word yet, just watched. Hank crossed the yard, then stopped. His boot caught something thin and sharp, a toothpick, oddly clean. He bent down, spotted a second, then a smear in the snow by the fence post. Somebody had stood there a while, long enough to fidget, chew wood, and leave a mark. Inside, Edith was stirring beans. She looked up as Hank entered, eyes tired but soft. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded. "Found something you ought to see." She read the document slowly, fingers pressing each corner like it might vanish. "I didn't come here asking for worth," she said. "I just didn't want to be sent away again." "You weren't, not by me," she swallowed. "But they're trying to make it look like pity." like I'm here on borrowed place. Hank folded the ledger. Then we prove what's true. In daylight. On paper. She nodded, wiped her hands on her apron, then hesitated. You ever wonder if quiet folk get walked on 'cause we won't shout? He smiled. Sure, but sometimes we're just waiting for the right time to stand still and let the shouting trip over itself. Outside, a horse snorted. Wade Pritchard was back, hat tipped, grin smooth as lard. Just checking if your cook fire's still blazing. Heard some folks might be getting sick around here. Might hurt your spring beef numbers if folks thought food was to blame. Hank stepped down off the porch. You eat any of it? Wade chuckled. Course not. Rich food never sat right with me. That's your mistake, Hank said plainly. You're selling stories about meals you ain't tasted. Wade's eyes thinned. Truth don't need tasting, Calder. Just believing. Edith appeared in the doorway then, flower on her sleeve, holding a ladle like a scepter. You want truth? She said. There's broth left on the stove. Wade didn't move. Didn't dare. The Sunday potluck will feed more than mouths. With papers in hand and stories brewing, can truth be served hotter than gossip? Sunday morning broke with brittle sunshine and the smell of cold pine. Dusty Creek's ridgetop church gathered the living and the curious, boots clean, voices low. Snowmelt dripped from the eaves as potluck tables sagged under jars of jam, crockery, and promises cooked slow. Hank Calder walked beside Edith, her apron pressed and hair tucked neat beneath a blue scarf. She carried cornbread and Chile cream in quiet hands. She wasn't smiling, but she was steady. They placed their food at the edge of the table, near the elders. Juanita nodded her thanks. Doc Merriweather tapped a spoon against the bowl and said, Mild chile. Good for bellies that have been too loud. Across the clearing, Vera Lark stepped from her wagon in fur cuffs and a smug grin. She kissed cheeks that didn't want it and laughed a little too loud. And beside her, Wade Pritchard, all silver buttons and slow menace, passed out handbills for a Cattle Futures luncheon next week. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Hank stayed near the fire pit. He watched the boots more than the faces. Vera's patent leather pair crunched right up to Edith. Well, bless your heart, Vera said, voice syruped with mock surprise. I didn't realize you'd be brave enough to show. Edith didn't flinch. I cook. I don't hide. Vera lifted her chin. Folks have been saying that your kitchen's gotten folks sick. Folks also say the moon's made of cheese, Edith replied, then added, but still boil my water. Vera blinked, thrown off. Then, a sharp cough from one boy, then another. Clutches of belly, worried mothers. Doc rushed over, took pulses, pressed palms. Started yesterday, he said, scanning faces, before this gathering, before her food. But the fear had already been planted. Pritchard moved like wind through dry grass, leaning into ears. This town's got a health problem, he whispered. Could be bad for the beef market. Might affect insurance rates, too. Edith stood motionless. Her ladle dripped slow back into the crock. Hank stepped forward, ledger in hand. He didn't raise his voice. This here, he said, is a standing agreement from Silver Spur's past owner. Says the cookhouse pays out like top hands. Winter bonus, too, if health holds. Doc squinted, then nodded. I remember. Used to be pinned up near the stove. Hank set it on the table. Edith ain't charity. She's payroll and backbone. A murmur passed through the crowd like a low gust. Some nodded. Some frowned. Vera folded her arms. I always said Hank Calder could be sweet, she said coolly, but not smart. Juanita stepped beside her. Funny thing, smart men know to wash their hands and mind their mouths. Doc raised a hand. We'll sort the sickness with facts, not whispers. You feel ill, come see me. You want truth, test your water, and look at your hands before you blame a kitchen. The potluck didn't end with joy, but it didn't end with fire, either. Children still played. The cornbread got eaten. Vera and Pritchard left early, her pride wounded, his plans unfinished. Back at the ranch, Edith unpacked the empty pot and looked at Hank. Next time, she said, let me fight my own weight. I didn't fight, Hank said. I just stood up where it was due. But standing tall makes you a target. That night, something foul creeps near the cookhouse, and not all wounds come from words. The sun never quite broke through the frost the next morning. Hank saddled early, ledger and signed contract in his coat, his pocket, and rode down to the Dusty Creek notary's office. He handed over both with a calm hand. Make it public record, he said. Stamped, sealed, and filed. The clerk blinked, then smiled a little. Cookhouse policy. Been a while since someone remembered that. About time it mattered again, Hank replied. By noon, a notice went up on the Silver Spur's barn door. Per charter dated 1873, the winter cook shall be compensated equal to top ranch hand and protected under ranch wage law. Hank signed it clean at the bottom, next to the old owner's faded scrawl. Doc Merriweather stopped me for his first inspection, not long after. He stepped into the cookhouse and sniffed. Clean soap, hot water, boiled rags hung neat by the stove. You could eat off this floor, he muttered. I wouldn't recommend it, Edith said gently, but you could. They both smiled. She posted hand wash rules by the door and started steeping willow bark tea in batches. Every sick cowboy got broth, tea, and a firm scowl if he so, much as tried to lift a boot. By supper, spirits were calmer, not well, but held. Then came the smell. Rotten, sharp, wrong. Boone was the first to find it, just past the woodshed. A pile of offal, still wet with frost, dumped behind the cookhouse under cover of dark. Guts, hoof trimmings, and beside it, a strip of cotton with red lace, tied like a bow. Vera's calling card. Pritchard appeared half an hour later, with a grin and a soft whistle. Awful smell, he said, nose wrinkled. Shame if someone served spoiled meat. You're not real subtle, Hank said. I'm not real worried either. He turned on his heel and left. Edith stood beside Hank, her jaw tight. She didn't speak. He grabbed a shovel, didn't say a word either. Instead of burying it, he lit 6 lanterns and placed them in a wide arc around the pile, lighting the area like a warning flare. You're not hiding this? She asked. No, ma'am, he said. Let 'em all see how fresh sabotage looks. That night, wind bit hard. The cookhouse window rattled. With it. Hank slept in the hallway near the stove, rifle unloaded but within reach, not for shooting, just for saying, I see you, I won't flinch. In town, whispers tangled like winter branches, Vera's lace, Pritchard's smear, Edith's rising name. And inside the bunkhouse, soup was passed hand to hand, and one man, usually silent, said through cracked lips, Ain't never been nursed like this. Edith wiped his brow with a boiled cloth. You're worth saving, aren't you? He nodded, maybe for the first time in years. But truth takes time, and in a town itching for blame, Sunrise brings a deputy and a lock. The cook keeps stirring, the foreman gets hauled in. The next morning broke quiet and bitter, sky the color of ash. Hank didn't even have both boots on when a knock came, fast, firm. Deputy Shale stood in the doorway, hat already off like he expected a scolding. Sorry, Hank, he said, eyes low. Town council wants a show of action. Says there's a question of food safety, public health. You gotta come in. On whose charge? Hank asked, reaching for his coat. Shale scratched the back of his neck. Call it public endangerment. It won't stick. But folks are nervous. Sheriff figures a night in the cell might quiet the talk. Hank gave Edith a long look from the hallway. She was spooning thin rice soup into tin bowls, her apron damp with steam. Her hands didn't stop moving. Stay warm, he said simply. Bring back your appetite, she replied, just as even. The jail was barely big enough for a cot and a coat hook. The air inside tasted like old paper and new regret. Shale brought him a coffee he didn't ask for and sat across from the bars like he hated himself. You ever think, Hank asked after a long silence, that a lie spreads faster than frostbite? Shale didn't answer. Back at the ranch, Edith stood her ground. The bunkhouse was half sick now, men curled under blankets, breaths short and shallow. She moved quiet between them, checking pulses, pressing cool cloths to heads. She stirred tea with one hand and ladled soup with the other. The air smelled of sage, onion, and something warmer, hope, maybe. Mid-afternoon, Juanita arrived with 3 schoolgirls in tow. One carried soap, one carried clean towels. The third handed Edith a little note. Thank you for the soup last week. My papa smiled again. Edith blinked twice, nodded once. Old Boone showed up just after, wheeling a cart piled with lime and shovels. Never built a chapel, he muttered, but I've sweetened a few latrines. Seems righteous work either way. They dug a clean pit behind the shed, spread lime in rings, and boiled water from the creek. Meanwhile, Vera Lark was seen in town, laughing loud on the saloon porch, sipping something sharp from a gold-rimmed glass, saying things like, "Well, if you build your love on cornbread, don't be shocked when it crumbles." The men who heard it didn't laugh, not this time. Night settled in with a hollow ache. Doc Merriweather walked the bunkhouse line with a stethoscope and a lantern. He arrived at the cookhouse door with a tired face and a small nod. "You're holding the line," he told Edith. "We're not through yet," she replied. He hesitated, then added, "Judge's clerk is riding in tonight with statements. You'll have an answer by dawn." She didn't ask what kind of answer. Instead, she ladled soup into a new bowl, cracked half a biscuit over it, and placed it on a tray. "For Hank," she said, "even if it's cold when he gets it." Doc took it with a ghost of a smile. "I'll tell him the cook don't break." Later, at the jail, Hank sat on the bunk, coat folded beside him, hat on one knee. He looked up when the tray slid under the bars. "Still warm," Doc said. "Still strong." Hank picked up the spoon. "I never wanted much," he said. "Just someone who feeds the soul without asking what it's worth." By morning, the truth steps into daylight. But will the town listen or cling to what they fear? Sunrise cracked the horizon in ribbons of pale gold, slicing through the brittle, cold like a slow blade. Snow still crusted the wagon ruts outside the Silver Spur bunkhouse, but steam curled steady from the cookhouse chimney. By 8, most of Dusty Creek had gathered in the ranch yard, not out of kindness, out of curiosity, duty, or guilt. Men stood with collars up, women with arms folded. Whispers blew like smoke through the crowd. Deputy Shale cleared his throat and stepped aside as Doc Merriweather climbed onto a crate. "No need for a preacher voice," Doc said plainly. "I've examined 15 sick men, 2 women, and 1 calf that ate from the porch slop. Same symptoms, same cause, none from Edith's pots." A few townsfolk frowned. Others looked down at their boots. He continued. "The first 2 fell ill Friday, one of Pritchard's own cattle runners. Ain't that right, Hank?" The crowd parted just enough to let Hank Calder step forward, newly released from the tiny jail. Shirt still rumpled, but chin held high. He carried a paper folder under one arm. "Right," he said, "and here's the rest." He unfolded the pages slowly, his mother's old ledger and the signed cookhouse policy, yellowed but crisp. "This is the standing order of the Silver Spur. Cook wages equal to top hand. That means Edith ain't charity, she's crew. Her name's on the payroll, her work on every plate." A few men nodded. Boone crossed his arms, satisfied. Then Hank pointed to a second document, the winter contract, notarized in Dusty Creek just days ago. "She doesn't just feed us," he said. "She strengthens us. We've had less sickness this season than any winter prior. That's the truth. You're welcome to read it." Vera Lark tried to chuckle, but the sound died flat. Her fur wrap looked heavier than her poise. "I don't suppose she's been tested by a real kitchen inspector," she called, voice tight. "Not some sentimental doctor and a few dusty pages." Edith, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. She carried nothing but her own calm. "No, ma'am," she said, "but I know what soap is. I know how to boil water and scrub a knife handle clean. I know the signs of bad meat, and I send home any boy who sneezes near a pot." She paused, hands folded. "And I've learned when to speak plain." Then she turned to the crowd. "We're not perfect here. But if you think I'd feed a child sickness, you don't know me at all." For a breathless moment, no one moved. Then Juanita stepped forward. "She taught my girls to wash before setting the table." Old Boone raised a crust of cornbread. "She taught my teeth to believe again." Even Deputy Shale scratched his nose. "Food's always hot, always honest." A wind stirred, then someone clapped, then more. Vera's lips thinned. Wade Pritchard, standing off to the side with arms crossed, just grunted and turned away. Hank gave Edith the slightest nod. "That ledger," he said to the crowd, "wasn't written to defend a woman like Edith. It was written because someone like her already proved herself once. All I did was see it." Steam rolled out of the cookhouse chimney again, curling upward like a flag. But what happens when the lie fights back? And the truth isn't enough on its own. Boone hadn't said much during the gathering in the yard. He preferred to let facts stack like firewood, quiet and undeniable. But just as folks began drifting toward their wagons, he cleared his throat, loud enough to catch every ear. "Deputy Shale," he said, eyes fixed on the fence line, You might want to check Pritchard's wagon before it leaves. I seen his boys dump that spoiled offal 2 nights back, downwind of the cookhouse. Didn't say nothing until I saw which way the wind was blowing today. A hush fell again, sharper this time. Pritchard's jaw tightened. That's hearsay, he snapped. Maybe, Boone said, slow as syrup. But I reckon you'd rather the deputy find nothing than me find what I saw with 10 others around. All eyes turned to Shale, who tugged at his collar and gave a resigned sigh. I'll have a look. 2 minutes later, he pulled a half-rotted burlap sack from under the tarp, then another. Then something caught on a nail, red ribbon, knotted and slick from cold. Vera's ribbon. When he turned to her, she didn't speak. Her face had gone pale beneath the rouge. "Miss Lark?" the deputy asked. I didn't know they'd—" Her voice broke, feather thin. "I only meant talk." Boone muttered, "Words can poison, same as meat." Hank stood beside Edith now, hands open but steady. "We're not asking for vengeance," he said to the crowd. "Just respect, and space to keep doing good work." Doc stepped beside the deputy. "And for the record," he added, "I'm signing off on the kitchen's cleanliness, in writing. No further inspections needed." Pritchard tried to save face. "This was all over a spring beef contract. She's a cook, not a ranch policy." "Wrong," said Hank. "She's the difference between a man waking up tired and waking up willing." Pritchard turned to go. "You'll regret this come market season." But the crowd was already thinning, with cold shoulders aimed his way. Before Vera could retreat fully, a woman stepped forward, middle-aged, wrapped in a dark shawl. Her voice shook, but it carried. "You have my nephew," she said softly, nodding toward the porch, where the found child now clung to Edith's apron. "I've been searching for him since October. He ran off scared. Didn't think folks would believe me fit." Edith's hand dropped gently to the boy's head. "He never said much," she replied. "But he didn't need to. He's safe now. And if you're family, he's home." The woman sobbed once, then nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Vera looked down, lips trembling. She turned without a word and walked away, her furs dragging through the snow. Later that evening, with the cook fire warming stew and biscuit trays rising golden in the oven, Hank stepped outside. The sky had that deep hush only fresh snow brings. He watched Edith spoon broth into a bowl, her shoulders straight and sure. "You all right?" he asked. She glanced up. "Better than I've been in a long while." Hank stepped closer, voice quiet. "I don't make big speeches, but I'll say this." She looked at him. "I choose you, Edith May, not for food, not for show, for all the things you've done that no one clapped for." Steam curled between them. Her eyes shone, but she didn't cry. "I choose this place too," she said. "Not perfect, but maybe home." Behind them, the bunkhouse lights flickered on, laughter carrying over the hard-packed snow. The fire's still lit. One chapter ends, but the real warmth, that's just begun. Stay for the last part. Come summer, the hills around Silver Spur shed their frost like old skin. Wildflowers poked through the grass where snow once blanketed the earth, and the cottonwoods by the draw danced in warm breeze instead of brittle wind. Life didn't just return, it unfolded. The cookhouse opened in earnest that June. Folks from all over began trickling in. Not just cowhands and riders, but trail-worn mothers, older couples, and children with dusty boots and wide eyes. There was no sign, not at first. Just the smell of butter and sage on the breeze, and a long wooden table under a simple awning where laughter gathered like rain. Edith kept the aprons clean and the bread warm. She stitched blue checks into every one, saying it made folks sit straighter. Hank didn't argue. He just kept hauling water, chopping wood, and doing the dishes with a dishcloth slung over one shoulder. No one teased. Everyone knew. That dishpan was a kind of badge, earned, not pinned. Doc Merriweather visited once a week for pie and to check the hand wash barrels. "Clean hands," he'd mutter approvingly. "Clean hearts." Juanita brought a bell from the schoolhouse that now hung by the cook fire, and every time Edith rang it, men came from the fields, boys from the ridge, and even Boone from his hammock under the cottonwoods. The boy who'd once been lost clung less now. He helped Edith stir beans and shelled peas like it was sacred work. His aunt worked in town but came Sundays to sit with him, always with a small wrapped parcel for Edith. "Just soap," she'd say, "or thread." But her eyes always glistened. Vera didn't return. Word had it she sold her fur shawls and moved east, somewhere her name might carry weight again. Wade Pritchard's slick smile never showed up either. The spring beef contract? It went to a modest buyer from Cheyenne, who ate 3 plates of Edith's food before signing. One day, Hank walked out to the porch with a sprig of mint he'd picked from the side of the cookhouse. He tucked it gently behind Edith's ear. "For luck," he said. She looked at him, chin tilted. "Luck didn't build this place," she replied. "No," he said, "but it sure found me the day I knocked on your door." That night, as the cook fire dimmed and the cottonwoods whispered above, Edith pulled out a sheet of paper and inked a letter. She wrote it not to a friend, but to a stranger, a girl somewhere who hadn't yet been chosen, hadn't yet been seen. "Don't wait for someone to pick you," she wrote. "Become the warmth. Someone walks toward. Be the fire that doesn't brag, just burns steady." She folded the letter, tucked it into a flour tin marked recipes, and smiled. And the townsfolk? They stopped whispering. They started nodding. When riders passed by, they'd point and say, "That there? That's the cookhouse where Silver Spur came back to life." And some days, if you stepped close, you could hear the quiet clatter of dishes, the ring of a ladle against iron, and the soft laughter of 2 people who found their courage, not in thunder, but in keeping the fire going. If you believe real warmth doesn't come from noise, but from kindness kept steady, stick around, partner. More tales like this ride your way.